Have you considered buying a riverfront or waterfront property here in Winnipeg, Manitoba? Then stay tuned today because what I'm going to talk to you about are all of the considerations you need to make before taking the plunge into a waterfront or riverfront property here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Hi, I'm Jennifer Queen with the Jennifer Queen team and RE/MAX Professionals here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And today I decided to shoot a video about just what it is like living on the river or lakefront property here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So let me preface this first by saying I am not an engineer or riverbank erosion specialist by any means. My background really is in selling real estate, and my husband Logan and I, we happen to own our own home right on the Red River. So we do have some personal experience from having had lived along the Red River. But before you make any waterfront purchases in Winnipeg, you are going to want to do your own due diligence, talk to the professionals. A lot of the time that includes both engineers, riverbank specialists, permitting even at the city, just to get a wealth of knowledge of the type of upkeep and things to look out for, maintenance tips that you are going to need to do. It's not just something where you get to buy the property, sit back and relax. There is some proactive action that you actually have to take when you live in these properties. So stay tuned, but for today I'm going to talk about my personal experience as Logan and I do own property along the Red River in Winnipeg that we thoroughly enjoy, but there are definitely some things you need to consider before buying riverfront or waterfront property here in Winnipeg. So the first portion of this video is going to pertain largely to living on the riverfront. And particularly faster moving bodies of water. So let's start with the Red River. What you are going to find if you're coming from another perhaps city, body of water, etc., is that we are not built on bedrock here. We are built on what they call Manitoba Gumbo, which is really sand, silt, and clay. So a lot of the water that you see moving here, a lot of the time it's a more brown or murky color water. It's not like crystal clear like you might see in rivers like in Ontario or other provinces. Here you are going to find that you see a lot of that sand and silt mixed up into the water, and it kind of has this brown effect. As a result, though, you have to keep in mind where that sand and silt is coming from. And a lot of the time it is coming from the riverbanks that the water is brushing up against and kind of moving along. So by nature, a river is constantly moving, picking up dirt and other debris from one area and often depositing it in others. So what does that mean? What that means is that if you are one of these riverfront properties, you might have your riverbanks slowly eroding over time. It's just nature. Water is always going to try and build a quicker path to its end game. So a lot of the time the river is trying to cut off portions as it moves, just the nature of the river. But what that means for you is that you need to be proactive and know what to do in maintaining your property so that you aren't losing chunks of it every year. The degree of proactiveness does depend on where you sit on the river. Are you on an inside curve, an outside curve? How is the current in front of your property? Keep in mind that the river flows north, so a lot of the time the water, if it's coming from the south, is kind of heading heavily at your property if it's a wide open expanse. So just the way your lot is situated is a key component that you do need to consider when you're looking at these properties. And of course, how much maintenance you're going to do. Keep in mind too, when you're buying along the river, that a lot of the time it's nature. You cannot predict just what the river is going to do. For example, in 2020, we had a very high water table that year. I don't know if you saw it in the news, but if you did, there was a group of homeowners along Dunkirk that actually ended up losing a huge chunk of their yards. It just kind of fell into the city. There was too much pressure, too much ice. The way everything melted, it was just too much strain on the lots. And we saw a huge chunk of land go missing. Now these homeowners, what they decided to do was they banded together to do Riverbank Stabilization kind of as a group. Keep in mind though that this is not covered by insurance. You really can't get homeowners insurance for erosion of your lot, or at least I haven't found a product before that does provide that. So these homeowners, out of pocket, paid close to $1 million just to do some riverbank stabilization. Now that's not each, that's all together once they combined and pooled resources, but it is a huge expense just to stabilize that riverbank. Another key consideration here, and especially in a situation like the one we're talking about along Dunkirk, is that you have to keep in mind too that this kind of project, building up along the river, does require permits from the city. It's not something you can just go and buy a bunch of riprap and restabilize the front of your property. What you actually need are to apply for the proper permits through the city to get those permissions to restabilize your property. So that can cause delays, and there is some expense associated with that as well. The biggest expense you're going to find associated with that though is oftentimes the city will request an engineer's inspection or report to accompany your permit. So these engineer studies are oftentimes quite costly, like we're talking a few $1,000s, where you go out, have an engineer come assess your land, say, this is what's caused the erosion, and these are my recommendations to stabilize the lot and keep an eye on it really, and prevent any further erosion moving forward. So when you're in this process and you've now hired the engineer, you have the report and recommendations, the next steps are going to be addressing what issues the engineer has recommended. So in some cases, they might recommend riprap, which is essentially a big kind of rounded stones. If you've ever traveled along the river here, you would have seen it at least on some riverbanks where they've done these preventative measures or reactive measures, but they're kind of like these big stones and they just come and dump. I don't even know how many, like yards and yards of them. And it actually helps to stabilize way down, protect your riverbank. However, that being said, I have had a client that was actually given the exact opposite recommendation. And in their case, the engineers came out, looked at their lot, and they actually said, what is happening in your case is there's too much weight on your lot and it is pushing the erosion down deep underground kind of thing. It was really interesting to read that report. But essentially what the solution was for them was they needed to remove weight from their lot. So they actually ended up moving the house on the lot that they had purchased back. Fair record here, our fair record keeping here. I did not sell them this house, so they called me in after they had finished all the work and wanted to sell it. But back to the story, their solution was that they ended up moving the house back on the property. I believe they moved it back actually 200 feet. It was a substantial riverfront property. And then they also ended up bringing in excavators and removing a ton of dirt from the property. It was 100% effective. They did not have any further riverbank erosion for the next few years that they did live there, while their neighbors who did not do the same work actually did experience some erosion. So getting a good engineer in, really listening to those reports and following those instructions is paramount to being sure you are stabilizing your property properly. Because in this case, had you have done something different, like adding riprap onto the property, you would have been increasing the weight load and actually doing further damage down the line. It was actually a really interesting study to read. If riprap is what is recommended though for your property, like it's not uncommon to see, and this is when there's substantial damage or erosion, but it's not uncommon to see bills of upwards of $100,000 per household to just stabilize the riverbank. Sometimes that doesn't even mean recapturing old riverbank. It means you've just lost that amount of your property and you are now preventatively stopping any further erosion. Okay, so what do you do if you want to live on the river and you are terrified of having these huge expenses coming your way? Well, the first thing you can start doing preventatively is actually pretty simple. It's planting trees with complex root systems that dig both deep and wide. That really does help stabilize the riverfront. It gives the silt somewhere to kind of collect, but it also kind of ties everything together under the ground. There's also some nice hedges that you can do that don't obstruct your views. If ever you want a list of the recommendations that I've been given, I can always share it with you. Just hit me up in the comments below. But yeah, there's nice hedges you can do so you're not obstructing your view, as well as tree systems. Also, every year you're going to want to monitor the corner of your property, particularly in the heavy moving spring when there's kind of icebergs floating by, as we say in our house, just to make sure that you're not losing any large chunks of land. You can address smaller portions of land with riprap. I've seen it done, and it was done effectively. It was just bringing in a smaller amount, addressing a key concern area, and then that actually managed to maintain the property for several years. Another thing that you're going to want to do as a preventative or preparatory kind of measure is just start to set aside some money, budget for that riverbank stabilization if you're in one of these higher flow moving areas, because it might just happen where a few years down the line, you all of a sudden find yourself needing to do $100,000 worth of riverbank stabilization. It can come out of nowhere. So having a contingency budget kind of set aside for that, putting a little bit aside every year, or just taking on small projects to do that riverbank stabilization over time, you will never regret it. Just some other considerations to keep in mind if you're a family living along the river. Logan and I have always had dogs. We've often had labs, so lovers of water, or golden retrievers, and they like to go and take a dip whenever they can. So it was not uncommon for our dog, if she got outside of the fenced area when we were on a walk, to go, and because we have no neighbors back here walking, we're able to walk our dog off leash, but it was not uncommon for our dogs to go take a dip in the river. Now, you heard me talk earlier about the sand and silt. This is not like the glistening clean dog that comes out of a lake. When she would come out, it would often mean she needed to go home and have a bath. So it was a slight annoyance, but I guess she was having a lot of fun taking a dip. Another thing to consider, though, is having young children along the river. Like I said, we have a fenced portion of our yard before the river, and our children have had it drilled into their head that they are never allowed to go outside of the fence without their parents around, for a couple of reasons. First, the river moves fast. If ever one of them were to fall in, they would be gone in a matter of seconds. It's quite terrifying. But the second reason, too, is because even sometimes when you think you're on safe ground above the river, what you're going to find if you actually kind of move around and look from the side is a lot of those kind of points looking out are already eroded underneath. So the risk for falling and actually hurting yourself too, or even falling into the river, is pretty substantial. So keeping back from the river, even when we're out on family walks, is important to us. We have some trails that the kids know are safe, that they are allowed to walk a little bit ahead of us on, but that's the extent of how comfortable we are at this point, letting our kids get too far away from us out there. It's important, though, to teach that safety and the dangers of the river to your children from a young age. One final consideration too, and this is a hiccup that really a lot of owners are going to face regardless of the river they're living on. I believe it's the same for not only the Red River and Assiniboine River, but like Salle River, Bunn's Creek, Omand's Creek, like you listed. I'm pretty sure it applies in all of these river areas within the city. But if you are applying for a permit to do work within your home, you would apply for a typical city permit, similar to what anybody not living on water does. But also what you're going to find is sometimes you'll be told you need to apply for a secondary permit through the city waterways permitting department, because they want to monitor any construction being done within 300 feet of the river systems. They are concerned about maintaining and protecting those waterways. So for us, we wanted to build a new front deck on our home. So it's not even on the water side of our property. But even then, it was within 300 feet. We had to apply for 2 rounds of permits just to do that work. So just something to keep in mind. There's a little bit more, I guess, red tape that you have to get through to do any projects, but it's all very doable. It's just as long as you're going into these things with the mentality that you're gonna have a few more hoops to jump through, I think you'll do fine. So I'll talk about some pros about living along the river, or at least what we've really loved. Pros. So if you're living along the river, you obviously have no backyard neighbors, which is nice. You have less neighbors altogether. The lots are often larger and wider too, so the distance between you and your neighbors is a little more spread out. We've really enjoyed it. We actually have great neighbors, so we don't mind seeing them, but there's a lot more privacy in a riverfront lot, I would say. And for us too, our property leads to some kind of protected landlocked green space, which we love. So in the beginning of COVID, when we weren't sure if we should be seeing people, it was an awesome place to just kind of get out, explore nature, go for a nice long walk. And we often would not see anybody unless it was one of our neighbors who share that same green space. But even then, we very rarely would actually see people. There was a tremendous amount of privacy and tranquility back there. We loved it. Another pro is the views. Like, you can't complain. In the summer months when it's super sunny, you'll get kind of that glistening effect off the water. It's beautiful. In the winter, you'll kind of get these beautiful views to for us, the south of just wildlife. And then also in the spring months, as the kids put it, we love to watch the icebergs kind of float by. It's really nice. Another pro is the wildlife. This could actually be seen as a pro and a con, but we really enjoy living along the river because Logan and I are both from Kenora, Ontario, and grew up in more rural settings where you did see a lot more wildlife. So we really enjoy the scenery here. I can't tell you the last time I've gone an entire day without seeing a deer. I would say there are deer in our backyard multiple times throughout the day, every day. And then you've got squirrels, foxes. We do have some coyotes here too. More rarely though. And the foxes and coyotes seem to be going after the abundance of rabbits we have in this area. There are some nuisance animals too though, namely raccoons and skunks. We had a skunk issue for a little while that managed to keep getting our dog in the backyard in the fenced area. It would just shoot her through the fence. But yeah, that was not fun. So there are some nuisance animals you do have to deal with as a result of living on the river, but in general, a lot of the animals are just really awesome to watch, observe, see the fawns in the spring, and just enjoy. Fishing is also crazy popular in our area. We have never done it. Logan and I grew up again in Kenora, Ontario, and we're used to fishing on lake systems there. But it's not uncommon for us to see in the green space, like a kilometer to the east, people actually fishing from the riverbank, and it's the same people that seem to come back again and again, so they must be catching fish here. I hear the fishing is good, but I can't speak from experience on that one. Recreation is also a great opportunity when you live along the river. And keep in mind this varies depending on if you're on a fast moving portion or a slower moving portion. As we know, the Assiniboine River is often converted into a skating trail because it has parts that are not nearly as aggressively moving, or a lot of people will do cross-country skiing in those areas. I've seen in the summer a lot of people doing kayaking and whatnot, but just again, know the area you are in before you go and hop in that water, because if the current is fast, you could be gone in minutes. So pay attention to what others are doing in the neighborhood before you go and partake in any in-water activities, but there are great recreation opportunities throughout Winnipeg if you live on the river. So we have never done it, but traveling along the river is another thing that I know some people do. I've had clients that live actually outside of the city that would boat down to the forks. We, again, have never put a boat in the water at our property here. We are in a faster moving portion, I would say. But yeah, a lot of people use it as an opportunity to get to the downtown core, go to the forks, have some dinner, and then boat back. It's actually a really lovely experience you can have. Okay, so that's riverfront living. Now let's talk a little bit about lakefront. There's additional advantages that you would have if you live in a lakefront property. So the first is additional recreation opportunities. A lot of the lakes within Winnipeg are man-made lakes, and they will have some kind of aeration systems built through them to move the water, but the water is not moving at a substantial pace. We're talking about fairly slow-moving water that freezes easily in the winter And it is not uncommon for many of the communities within this city to have outdoor rinks in their backyard for those people living on the lake. It's really awesome. There's some that even carve out trails from one skating rink to the next so that you could skate on over to your neighbors if you see them come out. Sometimes there's just a bigger community one in the middle, but it's a ton of community built around these rinks. Anybody moving to Winnipeg knows that we are a pretty huge hockey town. So if you want to get involved in that sense of community, these lakefront properties offer great value for that. Another pro to living on the lakefront versus riverfront here would be, again, putting those kayaks in not fast moving bodies of water, so you can actually enjoy a more leisurely kayak. Another thing too is there are less permit systems that you have to go through. While the rivers are all protected by the waterways permitting department, in addition to typical permits, if you're buying a house that is waterfront on a man-made lake, typically you don't have to go through that secondary permitting process. And the final pro, I think, and probably one that would really change some people's decision between river and lakefront, is the maintenance issue. You really don't have that much maintenance when you're on a lakefront property. You're not on a fast-moving body of water. The water is fairly still. You don't have to worry about maintaining your riverbank in a typical situation. So it represents a lot less ongoing stress for people living in a man-made lakefront area. Anyways, I hope you found this foray into waterfront living helpful and useful. There's a lot more to share in regard to riverfront living, so if that is something you want me to discuss with you personally, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help and give advice just based on what I've learned by working with clients as well as from living on the river. Keep in mind, though, I am not a professional engineer or anything like that, so I will probably be recommending those specialists at some point along the process if living on a riverfront property is what you are looking to. Lakefront as well, there's other considerations, so I just don't want to bore you by making this video too long, but please feel free to reach out at any point. I'm Jennifer Queen with the Jennifer Queen team. My contact information is in the comments section below, so feel free to reach me there. And if you found value in this video today, please be sure to hit that like button. It really does help me in determining what to come up with next. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel for anything real estate, living in Winnipeg, or kind of supporting local businesses here. That's what we plan to focus on in 2022. Thanks for watching today, guys. Bye.